Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I'm Captain Sidaris and joining me again for a very special episode is my trusty co-host 7 Saturn.
Yeah, hi guys.
As many of you know, we are huge fans of the classic PC gaming world and the mods, especially of that era. And yeah, tonight we have the privilege to talk to somebody very important, FileTrekker from FileFront. It was once a central hub for mods, maps, demos, everything related to gaming back then. And it's a pleasure to talk to you again. Hi there.
Hi guys, how are you?
Well, not so bad. I wish we had winter finally here, but luckily we're not about that here. We're about FileFront here. What can you tell us about this?
FileFront? It started back in 1998. But it was called, it's been called many different things, so we can get into the details of exactly like how it all came together, but the original version of it started in 1998, and it's technically still going today. It's obviously not as big as it used to be, but it's still hosting all the classic, Elite Force, Bridge Commander, Knights of the Old Republic, all these old classic games that you might still want to find the mods for, so yeah.
You have been with that from the start, or did you join later? How is that from your perspective? How did this come?
So I first got involved in FileFront it was called Files Network at the time. So I'll give you the backstory. So it was 2002 when I first got involved. And originally it was kind of two separate things. So there was this thing called Files Network, which was founded by a guy named Profiler. That was his username. His real name was Joss. And he basically created this network of websites. So if you remember back in the day, rather than going to filefront.com, you would go to like effiles.com, or you'd go to bcfiles.com, or you'd go to whichever, right? So it's like this network of separate websites called Files Network, and they used FileFront as the hosting provider. So FileFront would just host the actual mods, but the actual websites would be a separate thing. Anyway, so that was how it was in 2002, and I got involved in Files Network. A couple of years later, around 2004, FileFront bought Files Network, and it kind of all got merged together. So yeah, that's kind of where I sort of stepped into the story of it, really.
And were you already a modder, or how did you get in touch with that world, basically?
I'll tell you a funny story as to how I got involved, which is Elite Force related. So the reason why I found FileFront or Files Network in the first place. Do you remember how Elite Force had a expansion pack, the Virtual Voyager and all this stuff?
Yeah.
Well, when I bought Voyager Elite Force, I bought the twin pack, right? So they did a re-release where you could buy the base game and the expansion pack together in a twin pack, right?
Yeah, I have that actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So you'll probably know this. So if you remember in those days, like security and like copy protection stuff wasn't like as complex as it was today. Everybody, and I do mean everybody, had the same CD key printed on the labels on the inside of the box, right?
Yeah. And
the CD key for the expansion pack had a typo. So the expansion pack, yeah. So I went searching for answers because I was like, why won't my expansion pack activate? And that led me to the forums on Files Network, and that's how I got involved in modding. So then I started to make my own mods and maps and things. So I started to, because I didn't even know that was a thing before then. So it's all because of the typo on the CD key that kind of led me down this path, which led me to become a modder and then eventually get involved in Files Network. And 25 years later, I'm still here. it's one of those funny quirks of fate, like maybe if they hadn't made a typo on that CD key, I wouldn't be here. Who knows, right? Like,
yeah. I'm just wondering, is this the same one where the key was one character short, or was this another one?
I can't remember the exact specifics. I think it was either like a J that was a E or something like that, or it was a character short. I can't remember, but it was missing a character, or one of the characters was incorrect. I can't quite remember which. I'd have to dig out.
Anyway, a huge fuck up if you deliver stuff to the customers in this state.
Well, yeah, because I assume every single copy must have had the same issue, right?
Yeah.
Creating threads about it, and so not great. So how do you fix that issue? Do you just put the actual CD key on the website and then everybody has it, or what do you do? Oh yeah, very funny. So that's how I got involved in FileFront. Originally, I was just making mods, and then eventually got involved as like a volunteer for Armada files, actually. So for Star Trek Armada.
That's also still around, I think.
Yeah, they're all still there on Gamefront.com if you wanted to find all these mods and things. But yeah, it was the Armada bit, and then eventually I became like the network administrators for like the whole network. So I was just looking after it because we had so many volunteers working on all of these different websites and things. So I got involved in doing that, and then did that for many, many years. Looked after the forums and everything else. And then eventually, well, there's a very long story about it. I don't know if this is a later question. I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but it's a very complex history. But eventually I ended up owning the website, which is where we are now. So,
I mean, in a way, this, for me personally, this was the golden age, where not everything was on centralized platforms that had their own agendas, where, as you said, actual people from the community were keeping things going, were molding this in the shape that what actually was experienced by the user in the end, because it was from the users for the users. It kind of worked very well, and was not like, and tomorrow some investor pulls the plug because, well, this doesn't create any revenue. We didn't care about revenue.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the cool things that Files Network, FileFront did differently was, like you say, it was just powered by this complete army of volunteers. I think we must have had like 150 or so volunteers at one stage.
Which was really impressive.
Yeah, it's really impressive. But the nice thing that I used to like is each of the different websites, even though they had roughly the same design, they had their own feel because the people running them were the sort of respected people within that modding community, right? So they would customize it to sort of fit their community, and you'd get like the picture of the day where it would be that would be a cool interaction thing, and you'd have like the polls and all these different community interaction stuff. And then the really cool thing, which is completely different, and you wouldn't see this today because it just doesn't scale very well, really, but when you used to go to a mod, the description of the mod would be written by the person who was approving it. Like they would do a review, so they would download it and play it and test it and see what it was like, and they would write like an unbiased review of what this mod was like. And if it was crap, they would slate it, and if it was really good, they would praise it. And that's just not something you see anymore. Generally, the person making the mod, like if you go to Nexus mods or whatever, they'll just write their own description, which obviously it's fine, but it was just a unique thing that made it really it was exciting as a modder as well, because you'd be like, will they like my mod? Will they like my mod? And hopefully they like my mod,
And actually, even if you might not be a happy camper after getting negative feedback, if it is honest, at least okay, there's room for improvement or something. It's not like these projects that come up and they never really flew, they were never really well, but nobody's saying a word and nothing ever improves. Okay, then it will basically die. If you get honest feedback, at least you have a chance of improving. If you don't even know that what you did there isn't quite well, why would you change it?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I learned a lot actually through that way, because I remember when I submitted my first map, it was so terrible that the person reviewing it just emailed me back and said, I'm not going to approve this because it's terrible. Try again. So that was my first, but that was obviously like day 2 or whatever. That's great, because now I'm like, okay, I need to do better. Second time I submitted a map, it got approved, but I got the review was like, yeah, this is great, but you need to look at the, you've got leaks in your map and the lighting could be better here, and like all this feedback. And it's like, okay, cool. And that's how you learn. You're right. Like if you just live in an echo chamber and I could just submit whatever I want and, never get...
I mean, the best that could happen in such a situation is, okay, your download numbers do not really go through the roof. People won't really spread this. But yeah, you just see the numbers and you don't know what's going on, actually.
Yeah, exactly. I think numbers are important as well, because I think it is true, like you say, through downloads and ratings and things, that the good content tends to naturally surface to the top anyway. But you don't get that specific feedback from people who are like in the know and are actually like, best at whatever it is, who give you that direct feedback is really valuable, right?
And even today, I think sometimes this is really a problem when you hear people doing videos for, professional magazines or web platforms, let's call it like that, doing reviews for older games. And sometimes you hear them talk about it. And as someone who has played the game, you really get the feeling like you haven't really looked at the game, did you? You looked at it for for 5 minutes or something, and then you went on and read some articles from someone else maybe, but you never really experienced the game, right? Because what you're saying there is simply bullshit, and I'm not talking about taste-wise. I really mean the hard facts aren't even right. That you can avoid this if you have someone around that actually enjoys the content, who looks at this stuff and says, okay, guy, this, and this, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, these people weren't there because they were being paid to do it. They were there because they wanted to do it. And I think that's the key difference, right?
Yeah. Talking about numbers, I mean, it was, as you said, kind of a multi-platform, this FileFront. And when we hear about numbers, okay, if I look at this from a technical perspective, today you would have some content delivery network in the background somewhere that handles all the actual downloads. You have a nice front end. But this is all technical stuff that's very often very much separated from what the user will ever experience. Yeah, like, okay, I don't care what you do as long as I get my download. But you were more intimate with this. How did this look? Let alone the technical details here, just like you have different pages. How did you get this together? How did you hold it together? How did FileFront work, so to say?
So back in those days, in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was a lot harder to do than it is today. It's still hard to do today, but it's a lot easier because we have things like Cloudflare, and we have things where, you know, these cloud services now, and bandwidth is a lot cheaper, and, you know, everybody's got fast internet connections, and it's a lot easier to do today. But back in those days, it was very expensive and complicated to do. Effectively, the way that it used to work is the website. So the FileFront Files Network websites were all custom-built websites, and they were built by Profiler, who I mentioned earlier. And then we had another engineer called Phoenix, who was also like the head coder, CTO kind of guy, who coded all of the websites in the back end and the dashboards and everything else. So these are all custom-coded websites, and in those days, it was a lot more expensive. So FileFront actually had its own data center rather than actually having like just hiring like some cloud storage or whatever you do today. Like in those days, it had its own infrastructure, which was based in Texas. So there was a big data center in Texas that was just full of servers, because in those days as well, if you remember, like I think even in those days, we must have hosted about 4 or 5 terabytes of mods, which doesn't sound like a lot today.
It is.
Yeah, in 2004, that was a lot of storage. So
even today, I would say, if you really look at actual unique content, that's a buttload, you know. That's really, yeah,
it's a lot. Yeah, so we host about 7 or 8 terabytes of content today, but it's a lot easier now because we just use a Cloudflare R2 bucket, right? Like, we don't need to have a physical building where we put all loads of hard drives into it, because these days you can just, you know, it's still, you know, complex and expensive, but it's a lot easier to do. Whereas in those days, we just had a big room full of servers and hard drives. Like, and then you need redundancy as well, right? So you had to have 8 terabytes. So we had backups and things like that. So yeah, that's basically how it used to work. So it was physical servers in a physical data center, T1 connections, which were as fast as it used to get back in those days. And yeah, so that's kind of how it works. But I mean, obviously, it was a different challenge in a weird way as well, because the majority of people back in the early 2000s were either on 56k modems, or they were on slower. If they had ADSL, it wasn't as fast as it was today. It would have been like 156 megabytes at best, right? Like, it would have been something like that. So the interesting challenge there is today, people can download mods a lot faster. So they've got really fast internet connections, and it takes them a couple of seconds to download a mod. In those days, because it was so slow, like, you could literally be taking hours or even days to like download a single mod. You had this issue of concurrency. So you had all of these people downloading at exactly the same time. So it's not like in today where you can just get somebody on and off really quickly. That's actually better, because it's actually cheaper to do that, because they're not lingering around. Whereas in those days, we needed lots of connections, because you had loads of people connected all the time, just downloading stuff continuously. So yeah, it's a different challenge to the way it was today. So that gives you a rough idea of how it used to work. And then we had database servers and all these other things like powering all this stuff in the background. So it was a very complicated machine.
To be honest, I'm really wondering, because as you said, people were having much less powerful connections back then. And I mean, download was already, you know, slow in comparison to today. But if I imagine if someone takes days to download my mod, imagine how long it would have taken to upload it there. How did the stuff get up to the server in the first place? This is what I'm wondering. Let's take a modem. It would be, what is it, 1 KB per second upload? I don't know. Not much anyway.
I cannot remember if 56K was the same symmetrical, so I can't remember if it was 56K or
both were available. V92 was symmetrical 56K, but the V90 was asymmetrical, definitely. I just don't know. But anyway, let's say it was 4 kilobytes per second. Imagine uploading a 150 megabytes mod that way.
Yeah, exactly right.
It wasn't exactly stable at all. Like, okay, sometimes connection was reset, and that's it. You start from scratch.
Well, it's an interesting phenomenon, that, because you can kind of see echoes of that today. Because if you go look through the games on FileFront, Gamefront today, if you look at some of the bigger Elite Force mods or whatever, even though they're only about 50 megabytes, 100 megabytes in size, which by today's standards is tiny, right? Like I can download 100 megabytes in 10 seconds. It's not an issue.
You can have a JPEG with that size, you know?
Yeah, you probably can do. But if you look at those mods from those days, you'll find that they're like part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. And today you'd be like, why have you done this? Like, why have you? But it's because they were like, oh, I better chunk it into smaller files because my internet connection's probably going to die at some point.
So you don't have to start from scratch uploading the last 50 megabytes again.
Exactly.
Crazy times, definitely. But the other way around, was this actually an issue for you guys when you say, okay, they put it into smaller chunks? How did you? How should I say this? What was the impact of users actually using it? Was this something that you can really feel like, okay, it's the weekend and servers are burning, or how was that?
Yeah, I don't think people. It doesn't really. Yeah, people splitting them up into parts wasn't a problem for like us from an infrastructure perspective, because it's no different to what actually happens in the background today. Because today you do something called chunking, which is where in the background the uploader will just automatically just take the upload in chunks anyway, right? So it's from an infrastructure perspective, it makes no difference. I think where it was it was a necessary evil, but I think where it suffers is that if you're like trying to search for a particular mod and you got part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, it kind of messes up the searches a little bit. It makes it a bit harder to find. You've got to make sure they're all linked together properly. And it's a little bit more inconvenient for the user who's now got to like find part 2, find part 3, find part 4. And obviously back in those days as well, you probably couldn't download them at the same time either. So you'd have to download part 1, wait for it to finish, then go part 2. So it was inconvenient. It was what it was, and it worked for that era. You wouldn't do it today, really.
And did, let's say, certain mods maybe have some sort of impact? Like, this is the latest hot shit. Everybody wants this file. Were there instances like this where you say, okay, someone really hit the jackpot here, all of a sudden certain files are being downloaded like crazy? Were there instances of this?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I can't remember specific examples off the top of my head, but it would happen. It probably happened a couple of times a year where somebody would release a really big, hotly anticipated mod, right? Like I think there was one for GTA 3, I think, called the Real GTA 3 mod or something. I think there was a few. Like, I'm sure every game had one where, whether it was a big total conversion mod or something like that. It still happens today, in fact. Like, you'll see like Fallout London was, I actually worked on Fallout London, funnily enough, but Fallout London was released on GOG because it was so big, Nexus Mods refused to host it. And then and then even GOG was like, when it released, was like struggling a little bit, you know what I mean? Like, it was like, oh, look, a lot of people really want this. So
it's not an easy task, yeah.
Yeah, it still happens. But in those days, it probably was a little bit easier to bring the servers down. So it did happen from time to time, yeah, 100%.
I wonder, during our anniversary talk, you mentioned there was an option to burn a CD full of mods, basically, and send them out to the fans.
Yeah.
How often was this used?
Surprisingly enough, it was used quite a bit. In those days, especially when people had the 56K modems, if you wanted to download a big mod, or if you wanted to just grab a load of mods, what you could effectively do was add them effectively to like a shopping cart, right? So you'd be like, I want this mod, this mod, this mod, this mod, this mod. Add them into a shopping cart, and then you could check it out and just basically pay for the CD. So it would be... Sorry, go ahead.
From a technical point of view, how did this come to be eventually, because someone probably would be burning a CD. But what I imagine is, a little tiny elf sitting in the data center with a laptop or something, burning the CD, putting the data directly from the network. Because if you had to download this stuff yourself somewhere with the same speed, it would also still take ages. How did this work?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it was. It was just somebody in Texas burning it onto a disk with a CD burner. It wasn't any more complicated than that. And then you just pop it in the post and job done, right? So yeah, that's literally all it was. But it was really popular because it was actually quicker. I say, it would literally take days. So if we could, especially in America where it was most popular, I think we did do international shipping, but that wasn't really, it was mostly in America. But yeah, like anywhere in the States, like if it took you more than a day to download all this stuff, then it would be quicker to get it by post, because you could just do it next day post and you'd have it.
That there is still this, let's call it mantra, like never underestimate the bandwidth of a truckload of tapes.
Exactly.
Same concept. It really, as you said, sometimes it is just physically faster because there is no way in hell that you can have a connection that would transfer this amount of data. And back then, it was very much a reality, essentially.
Can I tell you a funny story? I'll protect the name of the game studio just to protect the innocent. But there's a game studio that I work with where I work now at Mod.io, and they were telling me a story about how back in the early 2000s, they had two offices, so they were based across Europe. One of them was in France and one of them was over in Prague, I think, or Belgium somewhere. And they had to like ship overnight builds of the game between these two offices. And because the internet was so slow in those days, what they would do is one guy would get a build, put it in like a bag and tape it underneath a specific seat on a train. And then when that train got to like Paris or whatever, somebody would be on the other end, would get on the train, take the bag from under the seat, and that would be the quickest way for them to get builds of this game between their two offices. They would just literally just hide bags on trains with hard drives in them. And that's how they would do.
You know what they say? If it works, it ain't stupid. I'm not someone who will judge this, and maybe for the younger audience out there, it was not uncommon even for professionals to do this. You could get the XP service packs on CDs, or I think I said this in the last interview that we had, even the Wikipedia, I'm not shitting you, Wikipedia you could get on a DVD. It was done back then for the very same reasons.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, it's funny as well because the CD as a format, if you think about it, is a very quick blink in the period of history, right? I think
basically, who is using CDs today anymore? I mean, I kind of like him, but whenever you get CDs, it's usually older software,
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it was probably about 1995 once people started to get CD-ROM drives. And it was probably about 2005 when people started to get rid of them, right? So, like, it's a very small period of time in history where we had CDs. But during that period of time, that was the only way, if you wanted to get a lot of data around quickly, that's what you did. You put it on a CD and you physically took it to where you wanted it to be.
And I was really surprised when I read that the CD burners, I think CD burners came up somewhere around 98, 99 here in Germany. Nobody had this basically, but they were available, I think, since 1992 or something. So they were there all along. They were just really shitty expensive, of course.
Oh, they were
this
slow
wasn't really an option.
Yeah.
So whenever you got a CD, usually it was like, okay, this is a studio of sorts that pressed a CD, let's say DXP service pack, for example. This was, of course, not burned. They really pressed them. But doing it yourself, as I'd say during 1995, it was still a rarity that you have had access to this kind of technology. And it would really be an issue to get huge data from one place to another.
I seem to remember ordering Service Pack 1 for Windows XP on a CD. And I think it was free as well. I didn't think you even...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
you could just, I think, mail them or place an order and they would send it to you. And I think that the younger folks, I really sound like my grandfather here, but the younger folks, I think, cannot really imagine this any longer, that you were sending an email or placing a order on a CD that contains updates for your operating system. Like, what are you doing, guys? Today you will get this via internet and you don't even have to think about it because Windows won't even ask you if you want them or not. It just installs them.
Yeah, it's so quick. I mean, if you think about the phone in your pocket, it updates all the time. You don't even think about it. Like it just
exactly
everything's connected and updating all the time. But
people just take this for granted today. It's like, those are updates. This is how they work. Well, that the technology behind it, that this works. Someone has to keep this stuff going. You have to keep this stuff running. And it's by no means something that is a no-brainer, that there's a lot of things going on, essentially. When you imagine how many people it takes, if you look at huge companies like Microsoft, how many people are being employed just to make this machinery work. It's a huge amount of people.
Think how reliant we are on this stuff as well. Like if you, in the last couple of months, I'm sure you noticed, like when Amazon went down, Cloudflare went down, Azure went down. So like every time one of these big cloud services goes down now, we all feel the pain, right? We're like, none of our websites work. My banking app doesn't work. I can't get money. I can't, like there's all this stuff that that we're so reliant on just being connected all the time. Whereas in those days, it wasn't the case. Yeah, like we would connect for a couple of hours and then we would disconnect because we couldn't use the phone otherwise. And then
exactly.
So it's a different.
And it wasn't this centralized. I think part of the problem really is that it is centralized today. If Cloudflare goes down for whatever reason, a shitload of pages will not be available for a while because everybody is using it. Because it's essentially a centralized, single point of failure kind of institution there.
Yep, 100%.
And what I would be interested in is how many people were involved in that, keeping it working back then for you guys.
But before we go there, maybe also go to the beginning. How many people started the whole thing? That would be also interesting.
Yeah. How did this grow?
So I guess you have to look at it as like two parallel stories that then merge together, right? So the original version of FileFront started in 1998. And it was called IO error in those days, like input-output error. It's actually quite a cool name. I quite like it. And that was founded by a guy called Derek Lebian, who created IO error, and that later became FileFront. It was called File something first, and then it became FileFront. I forget all that. There was so many different names. Anyway, so that was how FileFront got started. And then the Files Network side started by Profiler and Phoenix. And they started that around 2001, I think, so a little bit later. And they started building up this like the network of sites and stuff. So that's how those two got started. In terms of like the actual back end and infrastructure and stuff, I can't remember like exactly like who and how many people and things like that. To be honest, like it wasn't that many.
Order of magnitude 10, 20, something.
Yeah, probably about 10 employees or something like that between them. Like it wasn't that many people. What really drove it forward was the volunteers, that big army of volunteers that was kind of powering it all, really. So, I mean, in terms of like employees, obviously you'd have like the founders, a couple of coders. We had a community manager called Jeff, who was pretty much there for the entire run. We had, I think that was pretty much it, really. Like there wasn't that many people like doing actual, there's probably like a HR person and a payroll person, I'm sure, like and stuff like that, but I didn't really know those people. So, probably not that many, really, to keep the actual physical stuff running, because it just ran itself, right? It was like, until it crashed and went down, and then somebody had to panic and like things caught fire. But, There
goes the weekend, yeah.
Exactly, right.
Okay, when you're talking about actual employees, of course, there's always then the question, okay, they are getting paid. What are we talking about? What was the cost of that eventually? When we talk about multiple terabytes of data, as I said, it was already expensive to just host this stuff, finding a place to put this. But if there are people involved actually doing things for money there, it adds on top, of course.
So to be perfectly transparent as well, like, I mean, it was always it wasn't like a charity or anything like that. It was a business. Always was a business. Today we don't make any money, but in those days, like, it was actually quite profitable at its peak. For a couple of reasons for that. Mainly, the primary revenue was through advertising, right? So in those days, banner ads and things like that were actually quite profitable. These days, they're not as profitable. Like you can make a little bit of money from banner ads and things, but you don't make that much money because most people are either using ad block And since the pandemic, so since about 2020, the amount of advertising spend has gone way down. The amount of pay-per-click has gone way down. So you don't really make that much money from banner ads anymore. But in those days, we made lots of money from banner ads. And then we'd also make money through different ancillary things. So we used to do little sponsorship things. So whether it was like a gaming peripheral or something like that, that we would feature on the website, or whether it was some kind of sponsored competition, like a modding contest or something like that. So there's little different ways. And then later on, when FileFront kind of became Gamefront, it started to open up other revenue. So we used to do like short form reporting and news articles and things. So obviously they would generate revenue. YouTube channel, which would also generate its own revenue and things like that. So there was different sources of income, but primarily the advertising was the main one. And in those days, you could actually make some money through ads. These days, you don't make any money through ads, unfortunately.
Which is kind of funny, all things considered. Considering how much of a volume these, huge tech giants do basically with ads in some form. Like that's a huge financial volume that is moved there just for ads. And then you look at the flip side, like the guys who show them for money, and it doesn't really work. How do these guys make their money? I don't know.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, though. Like, if you look at Google, their entire business model is based on advertising. But if you ask a YouTuber how they're doing today, they're really struggling. Like, the amount of money that a YouTuber can make on YouTube has gone way down. The amount of money that you can make through having Google ads on your website has gone way down. But Google don't seem to be in much trouble, so you have to wonder how that split looks behind the scenes, right?
Yeah. I suppose it's basically numbers, like in absolute numbers, like the tiny little volume of one ad is nothing essentially, but it adds up just as a whole eventually.
Oh, it's
Otherwise,
just
I wouldn't see it as flying. Yeah, scaling essentially.
Of course, beyond the file hosting and the entire infrastructure, there was also the huge community aspect. What would you say was the bigger focus, the file archiving or the community? Was there a real goal also?
I think it's a good question. I often think about this because I think in my current day job as well, I think about this quite a lot, and how you can sort of replicate that magic formula between what came first, the community or the mods. The reason why people make mods in the first place is because they want to have that gratification of somebody seeing their mod, playing it, and like having nice things to say about it ultimately. So like if you were just going to make a mod and just release it into a void, you wouldn't do it, right? So you kind of need all of these community aspects attached to it in order to make it, to have an incentive to even make a mod in the first place. So you need to have rating systems, commenting systems, you need to have a forum, you need to have all these different elements, and also maybe some other form of official recognition, whether it's the picture of the day or whether it's a modding competition or whatever it is, right? You need to have these mechanisms in place so that as a modder, I have an audience where I can put my content out and I can get that gratification, that immediate feedback of people playing my mod and enjoying my mod. So I often wonder, like, I guess we were just in the right place at the right time, and we just happened to serve an audience where nobody else was really serving it at the time. There was a few other websites like File Planet and a few other things, which I don't think did a good job as we did, frankly, at the community side of the stuff. And I think that's why it was successful, right? And I think the reason why Nexus Mods is so successful today is because they've effectively done the same thing, where they've got all these different community aspects attached to it. If you just have a page with a download link, like that's only going to get you so far, So it's really critical, but like, which comes first, like the chicken or the egg? I guess you need to have the mods, because otherwise that doesn't work. But yeah, you kind of need to build both in parallel. And
I think the magic component that is still missing there is communications method, like forums or something. Because one thing is, of course, the guy downloading the file, trying the mod out, but the other part is not just download numbers, like it's like a rating, how many downloads did I get, maybe today you would have likes or something, but really talking about this, like, okay, what do I like about this mod, what do I do not like about it, or contributions, cooperations, like, okay, I like your mod, but I also have an idea, maybe we can collaborate on an idea or something. So the download one part is one side, so to say. You need some place to put this, and people can use it from, because as we discussed, upload times were horrible back then, and doing this peer-to-peer is essentially not an option, and you need some centralized place for this. This was what I take away was FileFront, so to say. But were you also involved in the communications aspect in some fashion? You said that there was a possibility of giving feedback or evaluating mods. How did this work?
Yeah, that's literally what we did. So I used to do that quite a bit. But we had all of our like filers, as we would call them, volunteers would do this job. Well, effectively what would happen is the person who made the mod would upload the mod and it would go into effectively an inbox. So we would just have this inbox of mods waiting to be reviewed and approved. And all we would do is we would just download the mod. We would play it. We would grab some screenshots, because the other thing we would do is we would do our own screenshots as well. So the person who made the mod could send us some screenshots, but we would take our own screenshots because we wanted to make sure we were taking like a fair, balanced like review of whatever we were doing. So we would take our own screenshots, we would play the mod. And then once we played the mod, we would just basically go back. We would go into the system, we would type in our review. Depending on the person, some people would give it a rating. So they would say, I give this 5 out of 10 or whatever. So that was a little bit funny because you would have no consistency between like different people had different rating systems and things, but it didn't really matter. But we would do this thing where we would, review the mod, and then we would approve it, and it would go live on the website, and then it would go live with our screenshots and our review attached to it. Only downside to that, obviously, is that if you were submitting your mod, you might have to wait a little while for it to appear on the website. So whereas today you upload something, it just appears immediately. So swings and roundabouts, but I think that was part of the secret sauce of it, though, because I think it meant that every single mod that was on the website as well was actually really nicely presented, because we would make sure it had a really nice title that was easily searchable. We'd make sure the description made sense, the screenshots were all in place. Whereas you go look at something like Nexus mods today, and a lot of the mods are just like, how's anyone going to find this? Like, they've just called it my mod, and they've just put, please like my mod, and then they've not put any screenshots on it, and it's kind of like, who's going to download? Like, who wants this? I don't know what this is.
Even worse, spreading problematic files in a way. What you describe is basically curated content. And today, this is really, really hard to come by, that someone really invests time, energy, and essentially also money on someone else's work to present this. Today, people would pay you money for that kind of thing.
Yeah, and well, that's the other thing as well. Everything was nicely organized and put into nice categories, and so everything was really nice and discoverable. So it was really good from that perspective, because it was very easy as a user to find what you wanted. It was easily discoverable. It was very clear what that mod did and what it was. I had screenshots of it. The downside, obviously, is like I was saying before about scalability. Like, there's only so many human beings that you can get to do this stuff, so it didn't scale particularly well. So I'm sure it wouldn't be practical to do it today, because there'd be far too many mods to review. Yeah, I think that was part of, like I say, it was just the right place and the right time, and it worked for the time. So
it's really kind of crazy because this pattern that you just described, the sheer rate of content coming up has, I think, increased everywhere. Be that just dumb news articles on some newspaper pages, or mods on a platform, or in my case, for example, looking at music coming out, new tracks somewhere. It's like, I don't have the time to review all this new stuff that interests me. It's really an issue, and I find it really interesting to see how this kind of is an issue everywhere. Like, do people really have more capacity to produce content, or is it, well, in absolute numbers it has increased, but the quality has declined because you cannot keep it up at this pace, of course. I'm sometimes wondering if this is kind of a constant.
I think there's a couple of different factors. I think as time has gone on, I mean, one, the internet is just a bigger place. Like back in the early 2000s, there wasn't as many people on the internet as there is today. But I think the reasons why you see so much more content and such a faster cadence today is partly because the tools that we have to make this stuff is a lot easier, right? So it's a lot quicker now to make some content. Like if you wanted to do a video or an image, or even if you were making a mod for a game, it's a lot quicker now to, PCs are much more powerful, and I can cook a map in Unreal Engine in a fraction of the time it took me to export a map out of GTK Radiant or whatever, right? Like it's a lot quicker to make content. And I hate to bring up the AI topic, but you've also got AI as well, which is helping people to do, whether it's good quality or not is another topic, but it's allowing people to churn over content a lot more quickly than you could back in those days. So you in those days, you really did have a barrier to entry, which was a blessing and a curse, because it meant that there was a lot less content, but it meant that the content that did exist, like the person had to have a certain level of skill and patience and whatever else to be able to make that content and release it. Whereas today, the barrier to entry is a lot lower, so there's way more content. A lot of it is just noise, unfortunately. So, it's a double-edged sword again.
Going back a little bit to the community side, I also wonder, did you guys ever host any events, anything where you basically guided the community in any direction?
Yeah, there's a lot of different mechanisms you can use to do that. I think modding competitions and modding contests is the main one. Because if you have an event coming up, whether it's Halloween or Christmas or whatever it is, or if you just want to have maybe you do a promotional tie-in with the game publisher or whatever you're doing, that's a good way to activate people, right? Because you can be like, okay, we're going to do a prize, whether it's like a graphics card or a cash prize or whatever you're going to do. And you can set a theme, right? So it's like, we want to see the best Halloween themed mods. If your intention is to get a bunch of that kind of content, then you're going to get a bunch of that content, right? So that's like one obvious mechanism that was really quite useful if you wanted to kind of rally around, and it would draw interest as well, because it would probably bring people in who maybe hadn't made a mod before, or they were making mods for a similar game but not that particular game. So it was a good way to kind of get people across the different games. Similarly as well, like that leads me on to the other thing we would do, which is we would try as best as possible to kind of like, even though each of the individual websites was a standalone thing, we would try and cross-promote as much as we could. So we would have like a network newsletter that people could sign up to, which would tell you about things going on elsewhere within the Files network. If you had like all the Star Trek games, they would do things to kind of like cross-promote to each other. So it'd be like, hey, you want to check out the Bridge Commander website because they're doing something over there, and stuff like that, right? So yeah, and eventually just built into this. I mean, I think people tend to stick to the game they want to mod, right? Because that you kind of know what you want to do. Like if you're playing Elite Force, you want mods for Elite Force. But I think that was quite effective in bringing together this larger community of people, even if they were just finding like common interest in just Star Trek in general or whatever it was. Like it was bringing together a bigger community, which as a whole was way more powerful than just people being in their own little individual buckets, if that makes sense.
And can you remember, was there a community who produced the most stuff or produced the most drama?
Oh, like, yeah. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I honestly couldn't tell you individual stories off the top of my head. I am very old now and my brain is rattled, but it would happen quite a lot. Yeah, you would get a lot of, as we would call it, forum drama. So everything from like the obvious stuff, like so-and-so stole my mod or whatever, which was quite common, unfortunately. And it would get more complicated. So you would just get people who just very obviously didn't like each other, and they would just hate each other, and they would start flaming wars on the forums, or they would just accuse each other of this and that, and they would eventually or inevitably always run off to a moderator or somebody to be like, hey, I think you should ban this guy, and then they would message back going, I think you should ban the other guy. And so yeah, I mean, obviously that's just part and parcel of any online community. I think you're going to get this kind of, I'm sure you could go back on the forums and read all the historic arguments and back and forths and things that would happen where frankly everybody was taking it a little bit too seriously. Like, it's video games, like, we're all here to have a bit of fun, but let's calm down and take a step back a little bit and just be like, it's not life and death, but
it was just sometimes it was really weird looking at the results coming off such instances. I definitely remember a forums post in a modding related board revolving around a Armada modding tool, a extension for a 3D model tool to import Armada models and also export them, do whatever you want with the model in between, of course. And people started to release these tools in a fashion so that it was not easy for you to use them to alter someone else's stuff. Like They were deliberately made in a fashion so that you can only import stock files with a certain checksum. So you could really only import the stock files. If you wanted to work with someone else's file, you would have to have the original tool format file, like milkshake format, instead of the native SOD from Armada. And when you see how people react to this kind of drama, like, okay, and then they start to pulling up walls between them. And when you look at this, it's so not track, so to say. This lack of cooperation. I can, and in a way, understand that it is really frustrating if you work your butt off to create something and then someone else just uses it, messes around with it, and gives it out as their own work. But the fallout then is, okay, I have tools that are kind of castrated, limiting myself as well. Like if I want to open my own SOD at some point, I can't.
Yeah, it's I don't want to bring up specific names and scenarios because that's just, I don't want to name people or whatever, but we did have a similar situation quite recently within Bridge Commander where somebody's made this tool for Bridge Commander that quite a lot of the different mods use. And there was the whole drama of it was released under a certain open source license, and then they wanted to revoke that license, and people were like, you can't just revoke a license like that. And then, the whole, I want everybody to take their mod down, and just this whole drama, right? And I think people have got two different motivations for why they make mods. And it was like going back to, as I said earlier, about how a lot of people do it for that gratification and the recognition and whatever. So I think there are two types of people. There are people who are making mods because they want that notoriety. They want to be famous effectively for I made this mod. This is my mod. Look at me. And then there are people who just make the mod because they're passionate about making something and they're happy to just...
Yeah, it's more about look at the mod, look at the cool result, not look at me.
And they're happy to just release that to the community and go, yeah, do what you want with it. It's fine. This is a collaboration. And so you get these two different personality types, and I think they sometimes clash, because if somebody takes something that somebody's made and does something they don't like with it, and they're like, oh, this isn't what I wanted, and I'm not getting enough recognition for this anymore, then that kind of personality tends to become a bit more confrontational. I don't really know if there's a good answer to it. It's just part and parcel of the modding community. It usually works itself out in the end. So the whole Bridge Commander thing, it was solved and everything's fine and the mods are still there. But there's a bit of back and forth that happens from time to time.
Was this ever a problem for the platform? Okay, someone used my mod and uploaded it to your platform. Please put it down or something.
Yeah. That would have. That still happens all the time. Basically, we operate under the principle of DMCA, so which is Digital Millennium Copyright Act. So as a platform, we're not actively going out trying to police what people are doing. But what we do is if somebody does file a DMCA or a complaint to say this mod is stolen or it contains my copyrighted content or whatever it is, then by law, we have to take that content down, right? Obviously, that then leads potentially to a further investigation as to whether is this a legitimate claim or, what are the actual, and that's the whole thing. But as a platform, you have to respect the copyright and the rights of others, creators, 100%.
You mentioned many different games were on the platform. Can you remember which games basically dominated the platform and which are just collecting dust? Yeah,
so the most popular ones in those days tended to be first-person shooters. So it would be things like Half-Life, Unreal Tournament, like Jedi Knight, World of Warcraft was quite popular, but Quake, Doom, those kinds of games. But we also had the Star Trek and Star Wars games in particular were always very popular on our website. So whether it's Bridge Commander, Armada, Elite Force, Empire at War for Star Wars, Jedi Knight again, all these different Star Trek and Star Wars games all did really well. Battlefront did really well. And Knights of the Old Republic and its sequels, they were all really popular as well. And then the Grand Theft Auto games were always really popular, as they still are to this day. The Command & Conquer games were really popular as well. So Red Alert and Generals and stuff like that. So yeah, those were the kinds of things. It was mainly shooters though, first person shooters, or it was strategy games that tended to do quite well. For games that didn't do quite well, what we would do back in those days is we would just whenever a new game had been announced or shown off at E3 or whatever it was, we would just spin up a game site for it if we thought that it had potential. So we would look at it and think, oh, this is quite similar to Quake, or this is quite similar to whatever. It looks like it might be moddable. So we'll make a website for it before it even released, because at least it was there. And if it caught traction, it caught traction. And some of them just died on the vine, right? So I remember there was quite a few. There was like Breed was a game I remember working on building a website for that, and it just immediately died. Like there was all kinds of different games where they just, for whatever reason, Act of War I think was another one, where for whatever reason they were just like, nobody cares about this game. Whatever.
Did you also have the opposite of that? Like, okay, we didn't think this would be big, and then at some point a user comes to you, like, could you please add this because we need it?
Yeah, I mean that happens as well. I think that happened more towards the end, because what actually happened was, if you remember, I mentioned earlier that all of these websites were custom coded by Profiler and Phoenix. By the late 2000s, so about 2008, 2009, they left to go and do other things. So we were left with this custom code base that nobody really understood or knew how to fix. And eventually things started to break down. So we ended up in this situation where nobody actually knew how to add a new game to the Files network, which is kind of the start of the end of its peak popularity, really, because once we couldn't add these, that's when Nexus mods actually started up around that time. And they were kind of starting to eat our lunch a little bit because they were able to spin up games and we weren't able to do it. And that's kind of where we ended up in the situation where it sort of went downhill, if that makes sense. So it was...
essentially it's a scalability problem. If you really, really customize stuff, of course you cannot do this on a conveyor belt, so to say. You have to invest a lot of time per game. And today, if you look at certain wikis, they look similar to others on the same networks, so to say. But it's kind of easy because the structure is always the same. You can customize it a little bit, but there are limits. But on the flip side, you can put this up really fast, of course.
Yeah, I mean that's literally what we've done today with Gamefront. So if you look at Gamefront today, it's not the same as it used to be. It's just a single website. And arguably, I mean, I will be the first to admit it's not what it used to be, because you don't have the individuality of all the individual games and all these different community things that we used to have, like the picture of the day and stuff. But that's just purely because there's nobody there to put a new picture up every day. And it's also for exactly that reason, because it's one single website and one single code base that we can easily maintain. It's better in the long run for preservation and to make sure it still exists in another 10 years' time. Whereas if we were trying to maintain 150 different websites, it would be, for me and Mikey, who works on this with me, it would be a complete nightmare, and we would just yeah. So it's a shame, but realistically, I think that was, again, like, you can't replicate what we had back then. I don't think anybody could do it today. Like, nobody today could, for all kinds of different reasons, SEO reasons, scalability reasons. Nobody could do what we did again today. Like, I think it was just this special period of time where it worked. Hey-ho.
Touched a very important aspect, actually, preservation. I think for many people, and I include myself, platforms like these are intrinsically valuable because as long as they are around, this stuff that someone created is also still around. And so I got basically two questions on that. The first one would be, did you lose content over time? And the second one would be, are there any ambitions of the sort? Like, do you see yourself also as a preservation platform, or is it still, well, this is where people upload stuff and download stuff, but that's it?
So to answer your first question first, we did lose some stuff through the whole story. So just to give you a bit of background on what happened, around 2011, FileFront was sold to this company called Break Media, which rebranded it to Gamefront. And that's when they started to do like the short form articles and the YouTube channel and stuff like that, which is still stuff we do because I still enjoy that stuff. But Break Media were, they used to own websites like Smosh and H Potato and all these different kind of like, they were basically WordPress sites which had clickbaity articles on them, is effectively what they were. They were magazine websites. So the people who ran Break Media didn't really know what they were buying when they bought FileFront. They bought FileFront and were kind of like, oh, this is a complicated mess of stuff. So that's kind of where the whole, again, there was a bit of mismanagement, frankly, under Break Media. Well, I say mismanagement, it was sheer negligence at points, but they had ended up instigating this weird policy where they would say if a mod never had a download after 90 days, so if nobody had downloaded it for 90 days, they would just nuke it from the servers, right? So they had weird little policies like that, which I hate. Like, I was not a fan of that at all. I thought that was
the exact opposite of preservation.
Yeah, it's completely ridiculous. Thankfully, thanks to the efforts of the community, and thanks to the efforts of places like archive.org. And actually, I want to, if I'm gonna give a shout out to anybody, I want to give a shout out to Robin, who used to own Nexus Mods. He's recently sold Nexus Mods, but at the time it was Robin at Nexus Mods who actually did a lot of work backing up tons of stuff from FileFront and graciously gave us that stuff back. And also Scott, who owns ModDB, who also did a lot of work to back up a bunch of stuff and helped us get the website back and restore a bunch of stuff. So it was a community effort really to kind of preserve and restore all of the stuff that ended up getting lost during that period of time. I would say at this point we probably have about 95% of the archive intact. Like it's pretty good. The main things that are missing from it tend to be videos, mainly because a lot of those ended up getting like DMCA strikes and things like that, whether justly or not. They were just disappeared, and for whatever reason, I think they weren't as important some people to preserve as other things. But most of the mods and everything else, like I would say about 95% of it is there. And then the second part of your question, in terms of what we are today, we're still technically an active website. So like you can go and you can create an account and you can add any mod and you can use the comments and rate and all this kind of stuff. So we're still alive, but I do see it as more like a working museum, if that makes sense. So it is mainly, it's about the preservation of it. So that's kind of why we designed it in the way we have. So it's easier to maintain. It's as low cost to run as we can make it, so that we don't have to be in a position where we have to shut it down or sell it or do anything like that. Like the main goal of it is just to preserve what is there. But if people want to add to that, like they're very welcome to do so, right? Like we're open for business, but we're definitely not. I think the main goal of it is just to make sure it stays in one piece.
You reach the cozy state, so to say.
Yeah.
I wonder, did anyone back then, when you started on FileFront, think about preservation or back up the whole stuff?
I mean, kind of. So in the early days, obviously, like the idea of preservation wasn't really a thing in the way it was today. Obviously today, I think it's become a much more prevalent thing, especially because, you know, games are starting to get older. The machines that you used to play them on are starting to get older. It's definitely become more conscious in people's minds that preservation is important, and that if we don't do something today to be able to preserve content, it's not going to be available tomorrow. Whereas I think back in those days, we just assumed, you know, this stuff would just work forever, and that isn't necessarily the case, right?
Back then, we also had this big lie: the internet never forgets.
Exactly. This is one of my hate phrases, because I have seen the internet forget a whole lot of things over time. Like there used to be that mod or a certain kind of information, and if you Google it, one part of it is actually being on the search index, being shown, but the other one is really actually this is gone eventually. And I think a lot of this back then was seeing things through certain glasses, like, no, this stuff is there for as long as someone keeps it around.
I think there was a bit of naivety. Well, I mean, think about this as well. It's the technology that changes as well. So think about Flash games. How popular were Flash games back in the 2000s? Flash doesn't
play it today.
So you can't even play them. Exactly. There is actually a lot of effort being made to convert them into HTML5 and all these kinds of things. But like, how long does HTML5 last for? Like, you know, it's this weird situation where you kind of have to think a little bit about how you're going to preserve stuff for the future, because the technology might not even exist in.
Yeah, tech is moving on. Exactly. It's kind of funny. A few weeks ago, just for shits and giggles, I have had a short discussion with the captain here about video formats, and where he said, okay, in a sarcastic tone, wouldn't it be nice to experience, diffix from back then? You know, you have a video of the size of a stamp with a low encoding bitrate and looks like crap. And I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to try this. And it is not as easy to create a diffx file from the content you have laying around, even if you have the installer from the diffx encoder from back then. It's not just like a feed it the file that you have. No, it just doesn't work with the modern stuff anymore. It's really an effort to be made to get to the point where you can actually make this work again. And it's really crazy, all things considered, because it hasn't been that long ago.
You know, I want to give, you've just reminded me of something. I want to give again a shout out to Mikey, who does all the tech stuff on Gamefront today. He's done this really cool thing where he's still got all the original files, so all the WMV and the AVI and all the DivX files and but he's taken all of these videos and he's transcoded them into MP4 files. So if you go back into Gamefront's archives and look at a Unreal Tournament 2004 video, Machinima video from 2004 or whatever, they'll just play in the browser as an MP4, even though they were originally whatever. And he put a lot of work into making that work. So, you know, fair play to him for doing that. But yeah, so we felt that pain quite acutely when he did that and transcoded all of the videos, which took a long time, I think. But it was worth doing because at least people can actually watch them. I mean, we could just put the original DivX file up for the people, but then, like, what do you do with that? Like, does it play?
I think that this is a two-edged sword. I think always keep around the original. So
we do. We have the original. We have the originals. Yeah.
But the intermediate things that you do along the way with them, I think, I'm not sure if I would keep them around, but same thing with YouTube. You know, when you look at what YouTube does with your content today, when you see videos being changed all of a sudden, you know, they have a certain look, and then years later you look at them and you think, is it just me or did they mess around with that video? Even they do it.
Yeah, you have to be careful, I think, with any kind of... It's the same thing in television, like or even video games, like how many remasters of video games have gone in and like screwed up the graphics and like messed up the gameplay. And, you know, look at the Grand Theft Auto trilogy. I probably shouldn't throw that under the bus, but you know what I'm saying? Like it's that kind of thing where you have to be careful how you remaster something, because you are in danger of spoiling the original intent of that content, right? Like it's like the worst thing I hate is when people take, you know how like television shows back in the 90s was shot in what they call a 4:3 aspect ratio, so they were kind of like square, and you see people crop them or stretch them so they fit a widescreen television. It's kind of like, don't do that, because now you've lost half of the picture. Do you know what I mean? Like, why would you?
Yes. Yeah, I think they did this with the Babylon 5 show, where the CGI sequences actually were already, I think, available in 16:9, and it was the normal footage that was 4:3, or the other way around.
It was the other
just
way
one
around.
of them was 4:3. Yeah, okay.
Because I watched the whole thing in widescreen and then was disappointed that the remastered was only 4:3.
But it has these sequences where there's obviously something cut from the content, because otherwise it wouldn't match. You can just stretch this, make sense in a way, but it shows what your limitations are. Actually, you can't make a one size fits all approach with that. You really have to be careful.
Yeah, I think there needs to be better work on that. I think again, like everything we do is just purely about keeping everything. We're not going to go in and change things or mess things around too much. Like the MP4 thing is a convenient thing for people to be able to play video, but we're not going to crop the video or stretch the video or change anything about its original, whatever it was, But I think, people need to be mindful of that stuff, I think.
I'm not sure if you want to go into that topic, but I just came up with it. It would be interesting for me what you think about monetizing modding. How do you stand on that?
So I have to declare an interest. So today I work for a company called Mod.io. I don't know if you're aware of Mod.io, but effectively they are it was actually spun out from ModDB. So it was founded by the same guy who founded ModDB. And what Mod.io is, it's effectively an alternative to Steam Workshop. So it's official mod support for video games who want to support mods outside of Steam as well. So if you want to do mod support on Epic Games Store or GOG or on consoles, so we support Xbox, PlayStation and Nintendo Switch, and we support VR headsets like MetaQuest and everything like that. So I work for this company today. That's what I do today as my main job. And one of the features we are working on is monetization features, which is giving game studios the ability to allow modders to potentially monetize content. So I just want to put that out there because that's probably going to color my position a little bit. I think it's okay if it's done correctly. I don't think it's wrong for somebody to say, if I've put a lot of work and time and effort into creating this piece of content, that I shouldn't be in some way compensated for my creation of that content, right? There is still a lot to be said about doing it for like the passion of doing it. And you've got to be careful that what you're not doing is putting yourself in a position where either you're just monetizing the kind of content that was free before, or you're just monetizing content which is low quality, just being done for the sake of trying to scalp people of money.
Or even worse, not if it is not your content to begin with. That would be the worst of them all, I think.
100%. Yeah, that's completely not acceptable. The way we're approaching it at Mod.io, which I personally think is the correct approach, is we're approaching it as kind of like think of it as like a partner program, right? So you kind of see this already today in games where, game studios will invite their top modders to maybe do a collaboration. So like so if you remember Left 4 Dead, was it Left 4 Dead 2 most recently, like Valve did an entire DLC pack, which was just community made content, right? I think enabling that kind of monetization is the way forward. So think of it as a partner program where it's not just anybody can just sell anything they want, but you're actually picking out the top creators within your community who are making these like big, total conversions or DLC quality content, and you invite them into a partner program and you work with those modders more directly to say, why don't you sell your mods? And they get an income from that. Effectively, it becomes a cottage industry. But the content that they're selling isn't just whatever. It's pre-vetted. It's kind of like high quality content that is
sort of the small brother of actually putting out a game. It's the tiny little brother of it.
Yeah, exactly. So like if you think about Fallout London, right? Like I'm sure like if you had the opportunity, a lot of people would pay for that mod, because it's this huge high quality. It's effectively its own game in its own right. It was made by a team of 150 people who put years and years and years of effort into it. And like I don't personally think it's wrong for them to charge a $5 or $10 or whatever it is for that mod, because you're getting that value out of it. As it happens, that mod happens to be free, but like in theory, I don't think it would be a bad thing if that was a monetized mod. But at the same time, like if somebody's just going to like slap a 5-minute skin on something and sell that for $3, that's a bit icky, right? That's not what you want.
I mean, in reality, this is what we see from professional studios, where you think, okay, you try to sell this basically not work, it's no effort for money, and they do this on a daily basis with no sweat.
Yeah, I think the other thing you need to think about as well is this is happening whether or not you want it to or not. Because one of the things I've started to notice an upward trend of in the last couple of years is a lot of people are starting to use things like Patreon or Ko-fi, and they're starting to like paywall their mods to some degree. So it's either join my Patreon to get an early access to my mod, or it's to join my Patreon to get some exclusive mods, or whatever it is, right? And there is a big uptick of that kind of behavior. And even worse than that, there's this trend where people are actually starting up Patreons and things where they're not even getting access to their own mods. They're basically like selling other people's mods through Patreon, and this kind of crazy behavior, which is just, it worries me a little bit. And I think kind of what we want to do at Mod.io would be to make an official destination, an official marketplace would be a lot safer. And kind of wild west of people just selling stuff through Patreon or selling it through PayPal, Donate, or whatever they're doing, right? So, yeah, it has to be done correctly. And I think there are other business models that work really well as well. Whether it's like a donation system, like a patronage type system, where you just donate to your favorite creator and buy them a coffee or whatever. So there's all kinds of different ways you can slice it. But I think there ultimately has to be a way where modders are rewarded for their creations, right? And Nexus mods are actually already doing this as well, but people don't think about it. Nexus mods have a donation point system where they're actually rewarding their creators based on how popular their mods are, right? Just because you're not physically paying for the mod with $3, they are still, that mod being on Nexus mods generates Nexus mods revenue, and Nexus mods shares that revenue with the mod creator. It's just a different business model, but ultimately you're already paying for your mods. You're just paying with it through your personal information or through advertising or whatever you're doing, right? Like there's just different ways of looking at it if you think about it that way.
I think the most important part is that everyone involved is, doing this voluntarily. Like, as you said, sometimes money is being directed in the strangest fashions. Like, okay, I wasn't aware that I'm funding this with my money. Or the other way around, you're being funded and you're wondering where that money is coming from. I think it really helps if you're really aware of what is going on there, really in a transparent way.
Yeah, transparency is important. I think that's the key thing.
Also, in a way, I think we always had it in a way of big companies just buying teams. I think about Counter-Strike or in Battlefield 1942, there was Desert Combat, a mods team basically, and they integrated a lot of that into Battlefield 2. So it is here for many, many years.
Yeah, I mean, Counter-Strike, the example you mentioned there, was originally a mod, which Valve bought. And I think that's probably made more money for Valve than probably the only thing that's made more money is Half-Life, right?
Yeah. Well, TF2 and their selling of hats is also a lucrative business.
Yeah, that's true. That's another topic. Yeah, like there's so many games that kind of started out as mods as well that have gone on to become really successful for their creators. Like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is another example. So yeah, there's all these different examples of mods where they started out life as mods and they've become games in their own right and they've done really well. And a lot of people who started out as modders end up with a career in the video game industry, right? So they go on to either create their own indie game or they go on to work for a game studio and have really successful careers in the industry. So there's definitely this intrinsic value where I think where we will move to in the future, and I think it's already moving in this direction, is it's at the moment we kind of think about games as official and modding as this like underground unofficial thing. Whereas I think in the future it's just going to become, this is a game and I can get content for this game, and some of the content will be made by the game studio and some of the content will be made by somebody else. But the way I get that content and the way I find that content is just going to be the same. So if it's just going to be in-game, or it's going to be through an in-game menu, or it's going to be like DLC, it's going to become more accessible, if that makes sense. And what we're seeing is that when you make mods that accessible, so I'll give you an example. So we worked with Baldur's Gate 3 and Larian Studios to do the official mod support in Baldur's Gate 3. And they released that about a year ago when they did patch 7 of Baldur's Gate 3. And before that, all the mods were just on Nexus mods or something like that, where you had to go and manually download the mod and you extract the zip file and you blah, 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 right? And all this kind of stuff. And then once we launched an official mod support solution, so you just go into the game, find the mod you want, and you press a button and it just magically installs. The amount of people actually using mods shot through the roof immediately. And it stayed that way. So at the moment, about 40% of all players who are playing Baldur's Gate 3 have at least one mod installed, which is like a completely fascinating attachment rate. Like that's nearly half of all the players have got at least one mod installed. Whereas you look at a game where you have to manually go and install the mods, it's more like 5% or 10%. It's really small.
There's obviously a reason why companies like GOG add this functionality to their Galaxy launcher, that there are some, in this case, curated mods that you can automatically download and apply to your installation. And from a gamer's perspective, outstanding. I love that. I mean, I'm of the old kind of people, I know how to use a file manager and place a file somewhere, but I still don't mind having this done in a more convenient fashion, of course. I don't really need to do it manually.
Yeah, I think for people like us, where we're used to just tinkering and playing around, it's more about the convenience. But there's a huge segment of the audience who just don't feel confident in messing around with that stuff. Like, it's quite a daunting thing if you've never done it before. Like, I've got to extract the zip file and I've got to overwrite some game files or paste this into this folder. And like, what if I break something? Like, what if it, you know what I mean? There's a certain people. There's a big segment of the audience who are not comfortable doing that, surprisingly enough.
And if it works well, I mean, even people like us, fucked up the installations at some point. Maybe you got a backup or not. It depends on how smart you were making one. But having the convenience, okay, I know this will work. I don't have to think about the details. Still an improvement. It makes things more reliable. And from that point of view, it's of course a gain anyway. It's not just convenience, also stability and having stuff work actually.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like that. It's that meme, isn't it? Of like, I spent the entire night modding Skyrim, and then I went to bed. Like, I didn't actually beat the game, right? And so it's funny. It's funny. I think it's and it's a benefit for modders because they've now their content is getting exposed to a wider audience, and way more people are playing their mods. So that's reinforcing that feedback loop of I'm getting all this positive feedback, and that's the snowball effect.
I only fear that it's very hard then in the future to preserve certain mods if it's on the Steam Workshop only or Mod.io or where else.
On the other side also, there's of course a certain, element of control over that. When you say a company in a way have to clear my mod, make it possible for my mod to appear there, of course at any given time they can say no, you're not going to do this anymore, or they charge you additional money or whatever. That there's, on the other hand, there's someone in control of your content. This is, I think, the part that I'm not quite comfortable with. If there was like a, let's say, a free version, an API or a method of a standard for that, where you can say, okay, anyone can provide a platform to interface mods in your game. That would be something that would be relaxing for me a lot more. If you look at platforms like Steam, if they are not happy with your Steam Workshop mod there and it is gone, there's very little you can do about that.
I think there's a balance that you have to strike between doing the right thing by the modding community and making sure that the game studios and publishers are also comfortable with offering some kind of official mod support. So the way we sort of slice this at Mod.io is we don't sign people into any kind of exclusivity, right? So like I mentioned before, like if a game is using Mod.io, that doesn't stop you from using Nexus mods or using some other website as well to put the mods there as well, to make sure they're preserved as well. So we're not like, oh, you must use Mod.io. It's an option that's available to you. At the same time, we allow things like manual downloads and stuff. So it kind of works like a traditional modding website if you want it to. So you can just download the mod manually and manually install it if that's the thing that you get your kicks from. So and also the way Mod.io is designed is it's open source and it has an open REST API as well. So it's quite open in the way it's been built. It's not this proprietary thing. Having said that, obviously, as a game studio, if you're going to have an official in-game and in-menu thing, and they're obviously going to have a moderation policy where they're going to say, we aren't going to allow certain types of content. And
so
then also
no more nude patches here.
The entire time I wanted to say that.
Depends. Like Baldur's Gate 3 has nude mods on it, but they're only on the PC version. So that's the other thing I was going to say. There's also if you got mods on consoles as well, then obviously Xbox and PlayStation have their own rules around what kind of content is allowed on their platforms. So we've got that to consider as well. So there are a lot of moving pieces in making this work. But again, it's an option, right? So if you go on Baldur's Gate 3, there are nude mods on Baldur's Gate 3. That's fine. If the game and the publisher are happy with that, crack on. That's great. But those mods are not available on the Xbox or the PlayStation version because of obvious reasons, right? But that doesn't stop PC players from enjoying that content, which is the way it was anyway, right? So the fact that I've got a set of mods on console is better than having none. And similarly, like if there are mods that aren't available at all on Mod.io, then they're still on Nexus mods. Like you haven't lost anything. Like it doesn't take away what you've already got. It just opens up new doors so that you now have more content in more places that's available and it's way easier to install and all this good stuff, right? So I think that's the way you have to approach it. You can't go and try and shut down what was, but you can at least try and push forward in a different direction, right? I think that's what we're trying to do anyway.
Speaking about pushing forward, what is the future for Gamefront? You mentioned it's more or less just a preservation side now, but do you have maybe some other plans?
I always have plans. Whether the plans come to fruition or not is another topic. But yeah, it's definitely a preservation thing primarily. So the one thing we don't want to do is end up in another situation where we have to end up selling the website or shut it down again, because we've been through that so many times in the past that I think you get to this point where we just need to prove that we're reliable and safe, right? Like, and we have done since 2018. We've been so coming up to 10 years in a couple of years' time. We'll have had no shutdowns and no sales and nothing crazy going on. It's just been there and it's been solid and it works. The things that I do want to do in the long run is, one, I want to try and bring back some of that community stuff. So I've got this idea of how we can bring back the picture of the day without having to rely on people submitting a new one every day. Because we've got this vast archive of picture of the day pictures, my idea is like, why don't we just bring it back, but it just scrolls through all the historic ones. So it's just a different one from the archive every day. And that would be cool, right? Because it would bring the picture of the day back. You could go back and look through them, and you would have something new there every day, and it would kind of work. So that's one thing. So little things like that I kind of want to do, just try and bring back some more of that stuff. And then the other thing I would really like to do, which is more of a side project, which I've kind of been working on, is try and build a mod manager for some of these games. So Elite Force, for example, most of the mods are just a PK3 file, right? And they go in the base EF folder. So it's very straightforward. Some mods won't work with this, but like it would be pretty easy, I think, to build some kind of mod manager that just says, tell me where your base EF folder is. I'm going to look in the zip archive. I'm going to find the PK3 file, and then I'm going to put it in the base EF folder for you. And then I'm going to give you an option to toggle it on and off. And then if you toggle it off, it just renames it to PK3.off or whatever, right? Like something like that, like a very simple mod manager, which would then allow you to just do a one-click install where you could just click install and the mod manager would do it for you. And then once you've got that system in place for one game, you could probably expand it to loads of other games, because like all the Quake 3 Arena Engine games I could probably immediately support. I could probably figure out how to do it for Bridge Commander. I could probably figure out how to do it for a bunch of other games, right? So then that might be a fun thing to do, just purely from a hobby project point of view. It's something I kind of want to work on. I just need to find the time, unfortunately.
The usual problem, yeah.
At the beginning, you mentioned that you worked on some mods for Elite Force and Armada. Can you name us a few? Is there anything out there which we can try?
Nothing great. Probably the best mods I made for Elite Force are, I made a few maps. So one of the maps I made was like a recreation of Green Hill Zone from Sonic the Hedgehog. If anyone remembers that game from back in the 90s. It's a multiplayer map where it's a 3D recreation of Green Hill Zone, and it's got the platforms that move up and down, and it's got spike traps, and it's got all these different platforming elements to it. And I even replaced the models. So I replaced the models for the hypo spray with rings. So you have spinning rings that collect, and you can get health from them. And I made the monitors work so you can break them open and get power-ups out of them. And so I did that, which was a fun one. And there's a few Easter eggs in that one, which was pretty fun. The other mod that I did for Elite Force most recently was, which I haven't really finished. It's more of a work in progress, but I haven't picked it up for a while. But it's like a HD retexturing of the game. So replacing most of the textures to make them, one, look a bit more accurate to the show, because the one little niggle that I had with Elite Force is it didn't look all that accurate to the show.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to update the texture quality as much as possible within the constraints of the engine anyway. So I've been working
kind of funny, because I had my hands on something similar, although probably more low level, because same experience here. What strikes me about this game is it still works just fine, but the models could have some more polys and the textures more resolution essentially, and then this game would still be nice and crisp.
Yeah, so I haven't touched any models, but I have been redoing some of the maps. So, for example, like the way the corridors are outside of the mess hall are not the way the corridors are in the show. So I've kind of been trying to remodel the corridors to make them more accurate to the show, and adding more lights along the corridors where they should be, and just changing the textures and things so that they all look more accurate to how it looked in the TV show. Obviously, there are certain limits to what you can do within the engine, especially an engine that's old, but it's looking pretty good. I like to think.
Yeah.
I wonder, did you ever try the graphic overhaul project for Elite Force? It's a German guy who did more or less something similar.
Yeah, that was on. I think I saw that on ModDB at some point. Yeah, the graphic overhaul mod. I think someone mentioned that actually when I was working on my mod, because I think he's done something. I think he's done more stuff with the lighting and stuff as well, hasn't he? And like made it support widescreen and things like that, which is really cool.
And the LCARs and everything is just improved, but he never finished the project. It only is a beta, and the last release was in 2017, so quite a while ago.
Yeah, I know how that feels. Yeah, I mean, it's actually impressive what people can do as well with such an old game engine, like the way they can go in and I guess there's some. Is it using reshade as well? I assume it's.
Yeah, there's also a reshader.
Yeah, but it's really cool what you can do with a bit of time and effort. So maybe I'll finish mine one day. We'll see.
And anything on the Armada side?
I used to just make maps mainly for Armada, which is a relatively simple thing to do. There's a pretty easy map editor for Star Trek Armada. So I didn't make any custom ships or anything like that. I'm afraid to say I wasn't that talented, but I did make a few maps.
It's a buttload of work, essentially. I digged into that a bit, and I think the modeling and texturing part is really the greatest effort there. The rest you can manage, I think, but once you start to create your own models, it becomes work.
Yeah, there were better people, more talented than me at making that stuff. That's why I got into running the website, because I soon discovered that there were people better than me at making mods, but I was pretty good at building websites to allow them to share mods. So that's kind of the route I went down, and yeah.
And in today's age, you mentioned that you work for Mod.io, but anything else? Of course, Gamefront.
Yeah, mainly just Mod.io and Gamefront. I still try to get involved in modding where I can. So like I say, I worked on Fallout London. So I was a character in Fallout London, helped them out with a few little things. So still involved with Team Folon. Yeah, just like to get involved in that kind of stuff. So basically my entire life for the last 20 years has been modding communities, and I think it will be for the next 20 with any luck. So that's kind of where I am.
Totally fine. Especially since we have platforms like GOG, which really gives us the option to play really old games. I hope it will never die.
I do. I like to think of Gamefront as the GOG for modding. It's where you go to find the mods for your GOG games. Like that's kind of, and I've been desperately trying to get them to do an affiliate thing where we can maybe partner up on that, but they don't respond to my emails. But it's really cool to see like all the classic Star Trek games are on there now, and I like the fact that they've got the preservation program where they're actually trying to put real effort into not just like saying here's a 20-year-old game, but actually making them work on modern computers, which is actually
this is really the cool part about them. You can say a lot about, well, they are basically handing you the same content as before and slapping on a dollar sign there, but no, they actually get stuff going, and this is why I find them so important, because if you have ever tried to run Armada, let's say on a modern computer, it's a nightmare. If you do this with the CD version, if you get the GOG version, there's no pain at all. And sometimes people really put up this discussion, why should I buy this game again? Well, you're not buying the game again. What you're actually buying is them investing the effort to get the game working for you in a convenient fashion again on your system. This is what you basically pay for, and that I'm actually happy to pay for.
It's really incredible. I just want to say, like, as well, just as a bit of insider baseball as well, on how the video game industry works in a way. The vast majority of people are gamers themselves who work in video games, and they want the same things that all of us want, which is they want to preserve games, and they want to make them available, and they want people to play them, and they want people to mod them, and all this stuff. It gets really complicated really quickly, because when you start to consider copyright issues and licensing issues all these different pieces of the machine that you have to kind of... So for GOG to be able to go and, get these games and get the rights to have them on GOG, and then more so have the right to then preserve them, and it's actually a lot more complicated than it sounds. It's they just made a few fixes and threw it up on a website. Actually, just to get to the point where they were able to do that takes a lot of people, a lot of work. That's surprising about them. So yeah, it's just something to think about, like when you think, oh, they're just trying to scam us for another... There are people who care, who work behind the scenes at these places. They're just not always visible, and they can't say what they want to say, but they are there.
A question that came up for me was when we talk about mod platforms from a user's perspective, I would say personally, I wouldn't quite care if it is ModDB or FileFront or whatever, as long as the stuff is still there. How do you view this? Is this some sort of competition? Like, okay, there are other mod platforms out there, or what is your stance on the situation?
No, I mean, like I say, the only reason Gamefront still exists is because of Nexus mods and because of ModDB. It's because the owner of ModDB rescued it, and it's because the owner of Nexus mods made a lot of effort to rescue that content. Like, certainly from my perspective, there's definitely no, oh, we're in competition or blah, blah. Like, it's not like that. And the way I see the game, like in general, like rising tides floats all boats, right? So the more popular modding becomes and the more people who are actively engaging in modding, the better it is for everybody, right? The better it is for us, the better it is for ModDB, the better it is for Mod.io, the better it is for Nexus mods, the better it is for everybody. Like, it's up to the community, like where they want to go and share this stuff. And I think there's no one correct answer either. Like, people like you and me who are probably more into the technical side of stuff, probably going to want to use something like Nexus mods, whereas players who just want to find something to play are probably going to use something like Steam Workshop or Mod.io. Like, and that's fine. That's okay. And
my question or my angle was more like when you say, okay, you're working on a means to, your example with having a mod manager for Elite Force, which would be great. Don't get me wrong. But when I think about this, first thing that comes in mind for me would be, okay, would that be exclusive? Because imagine there are mods on, let's say, ModDB and not on your platform.
Oh no, I would build it in a way where you could just feed anything you want into it. Yeah, I wouldn't.
This is what I mean. That would be for me a cool option from a user's perspective. Like, like in the old days when you were subscribing a news group, it didn't matter who exactly was providing for it, technically speaking, but you can pick different groups. And when I look at that from a mod manager perspective, something like I can pick ModDB or I can pick FileFront or whatever, as long as they provide the means to make a connection, so to say. Because, it's not always that the same content is available on all platforms. And this was my angle on that. Like, okay, if you guys are cool with that, if you could figure something out where that is possible, that would be great. Because if I want this particular mod or map or whatever in Elite Force and it is just not there on FileFront, what can I do?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Like, I mean, to be honest, this is probably why I'm not that great at making any money. But everything that I've ever been involved in or built has always been done in that frame of mind where it's either got some kind of, it's either open source or there's an open REST API or it's connect. Like, I don't like proprietary. I mean, I take that back. I think there is a place for proprietary software. It's just not the way I like to build stuff. I prefer to build things in an open way so that people can find unique and creative ways to use them. And then the more unique and creative that is, the better, right?
Especially in an environment like modding where everyone is open to contribute, put something in there. I think this should go both ways then.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's that same philosophy. So yeah, if I did build a mod manager, and I just want to emphasize the word if, because that is very much just a pipe dream. There is no official plans for a mod manager. But if I did build a mod manager, then yeah, absolutely. Like, there would obviously be a button on the website that was like install with mod manager. But if you wanted to use it somewhere else, great. I don't, that's fine by me. I don't care. The more people using it, the better, right? So, like I say.
Awesome.
Well, I guess we entered the part of the video where we open the mic to you. Is there anything you would like to add? Anything we missed?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground there. I really appreciate you bringing me on to talk about some of this stuff, because I think the one thing as well, talking about preservation, is it's one thing to preserve the website itself, but I think what we don't do a good job of necessarily is preserving the actual story behind it. And maybe people don't care, like who built what or who did what or whatever, but I feel like a lot of people put a lot of hard work over the last 20 years in making this modding website and the modding community in general work. And I don't think they get enough credit or recognition for the work they did. So it's really cool to jump on and talk about some of that stuff.
Well, you're always welcome here, and I just love hearing about those little history details. I just looked up the Elite Force files, and yeah, there isn't much there. So I'm really happy that you joined us and gave us so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
Well, then the last thing is, that's it for this video. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think about the games, and of course, play the games. Till next time, bye bye.
Bye, guys.